Welcome to our final speaker in our innovation speaker series as a part of the Green Sprint that we've been doing over the last 2 weeks. Today, to finish up our speaker series, we have Nick Hazell, CEO and founder of V2 Food, also ex-UTS, to give us a little bit of an introduction about V2 Foods, as well as the journey you've been on and why you think being sustainable is so important in your business practice.
Cool. It's really great to be back. It's been a while since I've been in this building. I used to teach BCII upstairs. I ran the 4th year, so I'm very familiar with this place and pretty familiar with UTS. That's going the wrong direction, isn't it? Let's go this way.
There we go.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview about V2 Food, and I understand you're about to be pitching. So I might actually puff myself up a little bit and start giving you a sort of a pitching address. So this, every business has a purpose, yeah? And that purpose is an awful lot bigger than any business that you start. And you've really got to understand what the purpose is. And V2 Food's purpose has not wavered for 2 years. Right at the very beginning, we were trying to think, what is this problem that we're trying to solve? Are we some sort of vegan-y sort of startup and we're trying to turn the world into vegans? Or is there a bigger problem actually that needs to be solved? Because I don't think the problem is that the world doesn't have enough vegans. The problem actually is that the world cannot feed itself on the current trajectory. In fact, it's already exceeding its planetary boundaries. And the main problem with that is not our ability to produce calories, it's because we have an insatiable appetite for meat, which is genetically wired into us. We all love meat. And as soon as we get a bit more wealthy, we buy more meat. That's the first thing you do when you get a bit more money, until you reach these sort of obscene proportions of meat eating that Australia and Hong Kong and the US have, where we're eating 100, 120 kilos of meat per person per year. And you multiply that by 10 billion people, and you see that we have an existential problem. And an existential problem means that if you don't solve it, you cease to exist. That's what an existential problem is. And that's the existential problem that we have at the moment on the planet, is that when you've got 10 billion people in 2050 eating the amounts of meat that they are projected to eat as the planet gets wealthier, then we basically need double the amount of land than we currently have on this planet to grow the meat that we're going to be eating. And it's not about climate change, even though climate change is an absolute problem as well. Even if there wasn't climate change, we'd still run out of land. You know, it would destroy all of the biodiversity, will destroy all of the natural ecosystems, and we still wouldn't have enough land to grow the grain to feed the cows that we like to eat. So that's an existential problem, and that's the problem that we're here to solve. And it's a lot bigger than just being a #1 vegan brand in Australia. It's a global problem, and V2 Food is kind of focused on solving that. And that's kind of the framing of everything that we do in V2 Food. And what's nice is having a framing which takes you outside, you know, the confines of a, you know, enough money to pay your bills, and it means that you frame the questions, the important questions of your business in a different way. And it's been hugely helpful for us to actually have a frame that's so big and so almost too big to even consider. Right, let's do it the right way so I don't get confused. You've all heard of Greta Thunberg. The good news is this global crisis, people are beginning to realize that this is for real. And people like Greta Thunberg, no one's too small to make a difference. It's for us a kind of a heroine for our business. You know, we're tiny, but we're not so tiny that we can't make a difference. We kind of dream that we might actually make a difference. So who's V2? We're an Australian company. We started a couple of years ago. We are good for you, we're good for farmers, we're good for the planet. This is actually, I've taken this out of a presentation which we're giving to government next week, just to make sure that they understand that we're pro-farming, we're pro-meat, we're pro-Australian industry. How was it founded? Well, those 4 old white men were kind of responsible for it. It's a bit embarrassing, but okay, it is what it is. Martin Cole was head of CSIRO Food and Agri at the time when we founded the company. He's now heads up Adelaide University Food and Agricultural Department, so Professor Cole, he's our chief scientist now. Phil Moyle is an inspirational venture capital investor. He's partner of Main Sequence, which is CSIRO's venture capital fund. Jack Cowan is the Jack of Hungry Jacks. So he wanted to bring in an Impossible burger into Australia. Impossible didn't answer his emails. And so we had a conversation with these guys saying, hey, you're pretty clever. Do you think we can do something about Impossible in Australia? Which was kind of the forming story, if you like, behind V2 Food. And I'm the fourth old white guy in this. And my background is R&D director for PepsiCo, R&D director for Mars. I've been doing food innovation for most of my life. Though I'm actually an aerospace engineer from origins. And before I was doing this gig, I was teaching innovation upstairs at BCII. I was doing consulting, and I was kind of looking for a job, really. I think if it hadn't been for V2, I'd have gone back into big industry and been R&D director for another multinational. Concept discussions 2018. V2 Food was formed on the 17th of January 2019. That was, actually, I was in San Francisco at the time at a conference, feeling uncomfortable because I was the only non-vegan in the room, and there was 200 others, and they were all vegans, and they were pitching, they framed the problem like this is a vegan problem. I was going, no, it's got nothing to do with veganism, it's to do with amount of meat that you eat. We started product development from January with CSRO, the fastest trajectory of product development I've ever done. Technology development, patenting, lots of different work streams, and we managed to get to a point in about 6 months where we convinced Jack that the product, actually Jack mistook our product for the Whopper. He got it the wrong way around. That was when we said we're going to launch, and we launched the Rebel Whopper in October of that year. So that's insane timings, but we have to move fast. November we got Series A funding, so that was 35 million. December we launched the burgers into other restaurants. All part of our big strategy to launch into food service. That was not a good idea in 2020, so we pivoted, and we pivoted into retail because there was no food service to launch into. So that was when we got into Coles and Woolies with our V2 mints and V2 burgers, and actually V2 sausages as well is coming out now. We went international into New Zealand in Burger King. We are now in Burger Kings right the way through Asia. So in Korea, Thailand, Japan, Philippines, and we're working on the others because that's a good business. We've set up a Chinese company, so we have a woofie in China with a general manager and a marketing guy, and I think I've just recruited a finance guy. We feel very comfortable about recruiting without ever meeting people. COVID taught us that we don't have to meet people to recruit them. In fact, I haven't met my team. The first time I met my team actually was end of last year. So, strange situation. Series B funding in October of last year, that was $77 million. And that's really so that we can really expand, build our factories. We've got a factory in Wodonga, we've got a factory up in Queensland. And we've started shipping to Asia already. What do we stand for? Number one, we're food. So we've got to be delicious. Anything that's not delicious will fail. End of story. There is nothing, no one is going to eat bad food to save the planet. Yeah? We're healthier. Make food from plants, you can fit in fiber. One of the things that we have in a high meat diet is we don't eat enough vegetables. So it would be a bit stupid not to have some of the good things of vegetables in our plant-based meat. And we validated a lot of this with CSRO. Sustainability is to our core, and we don't think it's enough just to swap meat out for plant-based meat, even though meat's got a carbon footprint of 70 kilos per kilo of meat, of beef, something in that region, a bit better in Australia than it is in the US. We've got to get to zero. Yeah, actually we've got to get to positive, so that the more meat you eat from V2, the better it is for the planet rather than the less bad it is for the planet. So we think that we can get there. We're currently at 2 kilos or 2.5 kilos of carbon per kilo of V2 meat. So I've got to find a way of reducing that and then sequestering the rest in our agricultural system. And we're already doing work on how do we sequester carbon into the soils as we grow our soy and we grow our canola. So we're putting stuff in the ground in a month's time as an experiment to see whether we can really amp up the amount of carbon in the soil. And we're Australian. As you know from my accent, I am Ocker Australian. Obviously I'm not, I'm English, but I am an Australian citizen. V2 Food is Australian, and it's very much part of our brand. You know, Australia stands for something. It stands for, well, what does it stand for? I guess it stands for people who like eating meat, for a start. I mean, we put stuff on the barbecue all the time. There's something about sort of clean and green about Australia, which you kind of wonder whether or not we're actually living a bit of a lie at the moment when it comes to clean and green. But there is this perception actually around the world that we're pretty clean and green, and that you know, so there's some really good things about Australia that we want to be part of. And one thing that beyond Impossible, Cargill, God knows, P&G, Unilever, there's now 100 companies trying to do plant-based meat. If we're number one in Australia and we're Australian, that's kind of us. No one else, they can't say, well, we're Australian too, because they're not. So that's an important part of our branding. There's a lot of science here, a lot of science. I'm running 15 different projects with Cyro. I'm running projects with UTS. I'm running projects in other universities. All of it's running in parallel. It kind of does my head in to try and keep control of all of these work streams, but there's an awful lot going on in meat. Meat is not simple. If I'm going to reproduce everything there is that's happening in meat with plants in a completely different chemistry, completely different structures, there's a lot of science that needs to be done, and we're doing all that in parallel. We've launched with a product that we think is good enough. It's bloody good, let's face it, it's really good. It's the best there is, but it's still nowhere near good enough as far as I'm concerned. And we're on version 82 or something now. We launched with version 57. We've got the next sort of 30, 40 versions in our head. We're doing science that we know will improve things even more. And we just got to keep going. This is never gonna, we're never gonna say, okay, this is a formulation, this is a Mars bar, you know, let's in Mars, they have a recipe which was the original 1930 recipe, and every time they do something new, they go back to the 1930 recipe just to make sure it hasn't really changed much. It's like, we've got to change, we've got to get better. We're not arrogant that we can do something big. It's not an arrogance, it's just like if we don't do something big, we're not going to achieve our mission. So it's kind of good to have a mission that's so much bigger because it forces you to be a bit ambitious, because actually, our nature is not actually ambitious. We're Australian. You know, we sort of make ourselves small. That's what we do. But you can't afford to be small here. You've got to be big. You've got to actually try and get to something of global significance. Otherwise, you're just playing, and this is too important to play with. It's actually sort of mission critical that we get big. I haven't seen this slide because someone did this for me, so I don't really know what to talk about it. I'm going to move on. Value chain. So you could think that our key innovation is around the technology that allows us to do the texture and the technology that allows us to do the flavor and the color and all that. That's really important. But actually, the key innovation here is the business model. Because if we can't get meat on the plate for the same price as normal meat, which is too expensive for the vast majority of the world's population, then we're playing with ourselves. It's not real. So what's the business model that will allow us to get meat on the plate in whatever country it is? And the key unlock for us comes from the idea that we're not necessarily vegan. Even though our product is vegan, our mindset isn't vegan, which means that we can work with the meat industry. And who's the best people to manage a chilled supply chain and get stuff into Coles and Woolies? Who are the best people to handle wet market conditions in a developing country? Who are the best people to handle the distribution of a burger through a food service system into the hands of the consumer? It's the meat industry, and every country has a meat industry. And we want to be the people that work with the meat industry, and instead of animal-based meat, it's plant-based meat. And what that does, it focuses us on a certain part of the supply chain, and we let other people run the rest of the supply chain and hopefully make lots of money from that. Because if they make money, they'll want to do it, and they'll want to do it more, and they'll grow it. So designing a business model, so we kind of focus very much on the back end of the supply chain. We want to grow the protein, or at least influence the growth of the protein with the farmers, because then we can start talking about provenance. And we extract the protein, we create all of the ingredients, and then we go over to the meat manufacturer where all those ingredients are assembled into the meat. And so that's kind of a different way of looking at the business model. And it means that we can take that into any country that's got a meat system. So we think that we're scalable. We just need to make enough of these ingredients that we're making. Our strength is technology, which is underpinned by Australians, brilliant universities, and the CSIRO. So we lean heavily and are working really hard with the scientists. We're getting a bit of reputation of being a bit hard because we're moving so fast. I think people hopefully attest to the fact that it's kind of fun, because we go in there and we just tell the scientists we don't want a paper, we want a result, and we want it tomorrow. And actually, it's a new way of working, and in fact, CSIRO have actually called it something. They called it venture science, and there's papers on it on how V2 and CSIRO have created this thing called venture science. And I didn't know we were doing this, but obviously we are. But really, all it is actually going to the scientists and say, we really want what you know, we really want that information, but please don't polish it. Just give it to us raw so we can use it quickly. And you can write a paper a year later, but there's an interesting story. There was work I did before I started V2, which was actually in, it was with UTS and with CSIRO. Different thing. It was all to do with virtual reality and aroma. I had this idea that maybe if you can smell a scene while you're experiencing it in virtual reality, it will be more visceral and more emotional. Really, and we combine this technology. What's interesting is the paper's just been published. But in the meantime, from when the work was done 3 years ago to the paper being published, I've started a business and we're sort of selling $80 million of products and making a difference. So that's the speed of academia versus the speed of a business. Technology, so proprietary soy from CSIRO, sustainable sourcing in Australia, lowest cost supply chain, patents around protein structure, superior product quality, and this ability to scale is kind of what we're about. Good for farmers, good for the planet, good for you. The good for farmers is coming because I'm talking to government, but it's for real. We want to be good for farmers, but good for you and good for the planet is kind of our motto. And unless I'm going to start talking about minimum viable product and prototype, which I can do, then it's done. So that's V2 Food. So we're on this journey. It's super exciting. I've never done a startup before. I've never worked so hard in my life, but I've never been so engaged in my life on doing something which I know to be kind of fundamentally important. And I'm of an age where I don't want to spend the rest of my working life doing something which doesn't make a difference. So sustainability is the one thing that we know if we don't do something now in the next 5 years, it's going to run away from us. So this is the time to actually do a startup involving sustainability. So good luck to you guys, because it's all on you.
Might give Nick a bit of a round of applause and then ask some questions. So you said something in there, you're not vegan, you're not vegetarian, you like meat. This is obviously fitting a bit of a niche, a need for people that are wanting to reduce their meat consumption, but still enjoy meat.
Yeah.
Are you happy with how that fits kind of in the scheme of people's diets? And, you know, we're seeing the rise of the flexitarian and things like that. Are you happy with how this product is being received in that space?
Yeah, I mean, we're meeting that challenge. So flexitarian, reduction, I'm also vegan. I mean, our product is vegan. So the fact that I'm not a vegan, I'm not going to diss any vegan. I'm only too weak-willed to be a vegan because I like the taste of meat. But the thing is, you know, you design for humans the way they are, not how you'd like them to be. And, you know, we're sort of wired up to like meat. And it's a shame, but it's kind of real. We're wired up to like certain things. We get dopamine hits when we eat certain things, and meat's one of them. So you can either pretend that we should be more virtuous, so we should all be vegan, or you can just design something which works the way we are. And what UTS has taught me and human-centered design has taught me is that you design for the way people are, not the way you'd like them to be. So let's design sustainable food for that people like to eat, in the dishes that they like to eat, and that they can cook. And wouldn't that be a good idea? We can only cook sort of 4 or 5 things anyway, most of us. So our product has to cook in exactly the same way. It's got to be affordable. So just make it easy. If in order to save the planet, everyone has to become a much better version of themselves, we're kind of screwed. It's got to work for how we are, not how we would like to be.
What do you think excites you the most about the sustainability journey that V2 Food is on?
I still get excited by, I'm still a nerd, so I get excited by the technical breakthroughs that we make. What excites me most? I don't know, it's a thrill. Every day is a thrill. We have daily meetings with our team because everything changes every day, that we actually have to get everyone together. And now we've got 60 people now. Get them every day on Zoom and talk about the progress we made in the last day. But I still love the fact that that we can do this. Technically, we can do this. We have all of the unlocks to do this. And now it's just a question of using them and get them into a product and get them into business that can scale. So I don't know, everything's thrilling. Seeing my products on the shelves, getting people to cook it, people saying they actually quite like the Rebel Whopper, it's a thrill.
We might get some questions, yeah?
Yeah, we've had some questions through the live stream. So Sean Thompson asks, when you say sustainably sourced, what does that actually entail? Are you considering soil degradation as part of this process, no-till growing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's this idea that, there's 3 places for carbon on this planet. There's carbon up in the air, which is kind of good up until about 400 parts per million. And then when you start getting above that, it's sort of not very good. It can be in the oceans, which is fine in the oceans as long as the acidity of the ocean doesn't drop down to certain pHs where crustaceans can't survive and you destroy all life in the ocean. So you don't want too much in the oceans. And the other place to store it is in the ground. You stop digging it out of the ground and burning it. That's job number 1. But even then, you can get carbon into the soil systems. And Australia, and when you look at that, Australia actually is one of the biggest land masses on this planet, with agricultural land, number of hectares of land, that we could start increasing the carbon content of the soils. And there's technologies available for doing that. So we've done the maths on some of the soy production, and you can store sort of 2 to 3 tons of carbon per hectare during the growing of some of these crops. And you can use mixed systems as well. And looking after the soil is an inherent part of our journey. We will never get to intrinsically carbon zero unless we do work with the farmers and the soil systems. So part of it.
Thank you. We have another one from Martin Lim. Have you looked into hydroponics to reduce the land costings, which could possibly increase the manufacturing processes?
Hydroponics. And what would be the advantage of using hydroponics?
I'm not too sure.
Less land. There's plenty of land in Australia. Look, hydroponics, if you're in Singapore and you've got no land, or if you're in Hong Kong and you've got no land, Australia doesn't have a land deficit, not as far as I could see. So use the right solution for the right problem. Hydroponics, if you want to, say, for example, do salads for inner city Sydney to reduce the sort of transportation or whatever, great. But what I always do is I look at the life cycle assessment. What is the true carbon footprint? And then let the science guide you. And if the science says, don't worry about it, the amount of carbon contribution of that air mile or that journey in the lorry from A to B is actually 0.1% of your total carbon footprint. You might feel bad about a lorry moving from A to B, but focus on the 99%, which really is the carbon problem, and let the science guide you. So I always want to go back to the maths. How much carbon does that solve? And if it solves the problem, do it. If it doesn't, do something that does.
I think that question was alluding to the environmental impact of equivalent of the beef stock versus plants, but then the impact of agriculture in context to water conservation, like, for example, rice fields.
Yeah.
A lot of water. That's the angle I think the question's...
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, you've got to be really careful with water. And if you get more carbon into the soil, you'll find that the soil retains moisture better. But yeah, I mean, it's valid. And in Australia, I think where we grow soy, it tends to be quite thirsty. So there'll be a limit to how much soy we can grow in Australia. There are other legumes which are less thirsty, which we're looking at as well.
Do you practice intercropping? Do you practice a rotation system where you give the soil a break from the nitrogen-fixing soybean and grow a grain or vegetables or other?
Yeah, well, currently we do none of that because we're not farming anything. When I did my due diligence to do this do this work, I did it wrong. I didn't realize there was no protein industry in Australia. I thought I'd be just buying some Australian protein and turning it into meat. And it was only after I got started I realized there is no industry in Australia. All of the legumes that we make in Australia, all we do is we ship them abroad. There is no processing in Australia. So we have to develop that processing capability in Australia in order for us to do all of that great vision stuff about Australian farmers, etc. The only thing that we grow in Australia currently is which is a shame, but look, we are where we are. So our job is to do that. Mixed agricultural systems, absolutely. I also, one of the things about being vegan or veganism in itself is that if you didn't have ruminant animals in a lot of pastoral systems, you probably have to invent them, because that is a pastoral system. You have grasses and you have crops and you have cows and you have ruminants, and that is a system which is sustainable. And if you get rid of the ruminant animals, actually the system doesn't work. It sort of collapses. But you don't want too much of that either. So it's sort of those mixed cropping systems which Australia does. And in fact, Australia does a lot of really good things from a farming perspective. Zero tillage that's all over Australia. That's not a new thing for Australian farmers. A lot of things Australians do is very good for the soil, and we can do it even better.
I've got a question further about your venture science, because I'm very much on that edge of thinking, taking up the latest and newest technical idea. How are you going about working with that and developing your patents, considering soybean proteins existed for a long time?
Yeah, so some things we're patenting, some things we're not. We're not going to be patenting anything, I don't think, in the area of crop development. But we're working with CSIRO on programs that they've been actually working on for years around high protein legumes, for example. We're after the protein, so a soybean with a 40% protein is much more interesting to us than a soybean with a 25% protein. So we're working with CSIRO scientists on that. In terms of IP, the deal with CSIRO is, and the deal with actually all of the research organisations we work with, is that we'll pay for the research. So we pay CSIRO for the research. We will own any IP that comes out of that, and we'll let any university or CSIRO or anyone we work with fully exploit that IP in any area that we're not interested in. So that's kind of the deal, because there is IP here, and we do have a lot of competitors. That's kind of the basic deal. Actually, how we manage our IP going forward is a moot point, and I think it's certainly some things we'll want to hold on to, but other things we would want other people to use as well, because it's in our interest that everybody, that there's a kind of an ecosystem that develops, and we're part of an ecosystem rather than we try and be the ecosystem.
I think Dave has a question, but while you're handing that over, it's fair to say that your rise from ideation to being on the shelf in Woolies and globally has been massive, but it's not just the product that has had that meteoric rise and kind of into the hand of consumers. You are also, as a company, looking at the supply chain, looking at where your products come from, the processing. It's not a business that just focuses on formulation and then giving it straight to consumer. Would you see yourself fitting into that space of affecting all different points of that supply chain and more of a business that is across that space than just a product?
Yeah, but actually the way you say it, it sounds really complicated, and I'm now thinking, oh God, what are we doing?
It's probably just the way that I am.
No, but you're right. It's look. Why do we call ourselves V2? We're kind of saying, well, the food system's broken. You've got farmers who are not incentivized to do things that they know how to do, but they don't get any money for it. They don't get paid for looking after the soil. They don't get paid for these things. You've got, so a lot of the food system as it is, it's broken. So the change has to be a system change. So how do we catalyze a systemic change in how we grow our food and how we and what we put on our plates? So V2 is a version 2 of the food system as much as anything. So when it comes to soy, for example, I mean, we could say, okay, soy, you can buy commodity soy at $350 a ton, dictated by price in Chicago. It's the reason why Australia doesn't grow any soy because there's no farmer in Australia who's going to grow it at $300 and whatever a ton because they don't make any money. So we would pay more to farmers, and we would contract grow, because it's worth more to us than just the crop. It's the quality of the crop that's important, and how that crop was grown and how the soils were looked after is something that is very much part of what we're trying to do and what we'll communicate to the consumer. So that's something that doesn't happen today. Most of the time you've got no idea where your crop is grown, particularly all the commodity crops. There is no link. It's a sort of a farmer does a commodity goes to a farm gate, everything's lost at the farm gate, and then someone takes that and adds some value to it. That's a broken system. Consumers don't want that. They want to know where the food comes from. It's a system which means the farmer gets nothing for what they do, and they should be getting something. And the quality link gets lost, because what's the point in growing something of a higher quality? You don't get any more money for it because it's a commodity. So that's what Smith's Chips taught me when I was R&D director for PepsiCo. Is the reason why Smith's Chips and Red Rock Deli taste better is because they work with the farmers. The farmers grow the best potatoes, and your potato chips are the best. Duh. Yeah, but if you regarded it as a commodity, yeah, you wouldn't do that. So relationships with the farmers and the connection with the land gives you the quality and the provenance and the sustainability that we all want, but we're not willing to pay for.
Last question from Dave.
Really quickly, you mentioned before, you started a business, but you've really started an industry now with, I guess, what you guys are doing. So what opportunities do you see in terms of alt meat and the future of food, potentially for some of these guys? We're all sort of starting new businesses, really new ideas. Where do you see like the big opportunities?
If you think about sustainability, there are so many things we do which are just inherently unsustainable. So take a look at what our carbon footprint is and where it is, and let's try and figure out ways of solving it. I kind of reject the premise that we've already done it. This sort of underlying in that question is like, oh, we've already done it, so therefore there's nothing else to be done. That's not true. We are just a startup. We're puffing ourselves up a bit. We're trying to make ourselves look big, but all of our growth is ahead of us. It's so much more to do. If you look at the plant-based meat and actually in the food system and this sort of non-animal space, there are thousands of opportunities. We're only going to go after meat, but there's thousands of other opportunities where the carbon footprint is too high and we can do something about it. The amount of venture capital money, if you're all doing a startup, you've got to think at some point about funding. The amount of money that's pouring into people with good ideas that might actually make a difference here is enormous. There's $1 trillion funds that are being set up to invest in businesses that are focused on sustainability. So you've got to imagine something that really could make a difference, could be scalable, and there's plenty of people that will want to back you because this is the job to be done over the next 5 to 10 years.
Fantastic. And with that, we might give Nick another big round of applause. Nick, if they're wanting to learn more about V2 Food, your website, v2food.com.au.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
just
perfect.
Google V2 Food. I think you come to us.
Yeah.
I think there's another V2 somewhere, but yeah. V2 Food or just V2, you'll probably come to us.
Fantastic. And if you're wanting to learn more about Deep Green Biotech Hub or UTS Startups, come to our websites. And with that, I think that's it. So another round of applause, and we thank you, Nick.